with external anatomy. Today we're going to get to internal anatomy, and I assume a little bit of physiology, which would be a lot of fun. So we talked last time about the vulva, labia majora on the outside, labia minora on the inside, and then the clitoris being at the anterior end of where labia minora kind of come together, and how you can call all of this together the vulva. There are vestibular glands as well on the external anatomy that correspond to bulbourethral glands in males. Not something you have to memorize, but just so you're aware. And much like, the male crash course for anatomy and physiology, really the focus is going to be on the gonads because they are doing such an important job, which is to produce eggs. And that's really the majority of the work here. So the ovary is the organ we're probably going to spend the most time on. They're paired organs. You should have two, bilateral symmetry, right, on either side of the uterus. And you're going to see they'll be about, they say, the size of an almond. I don't know. But their job is primarily to produce eggs. They are cuboid epithelial tissue. I don't care that you commit that to memory necessarily. But basically what they have is two regions, the cortex and the medulla. These are terms that you are already familiar with from the kidney, which we just finished. Good morning, John. Good morning, Abby. I knew you'd show up. All right. The cortex and the medulla, which is the cortex, kind of confusingly being the outside and the medulla being the middle. I'm not that worried that you memorize what their term, but basically the cortex gives it kind of a grainy appearances, kind of like I don't know, a little bit like alveoli in the lungs, a little bit of that kind of cluster of grapes sort of appearance. And then the medulla is the middle, which is where we spend most of our time and attention, because that's where primary follicles are housed and where primary follicles are matured into eggs. And that's the really, really cool part. So not surprisingly, it's surrounded in, connective tissue, no duh, has a good blood supply, no duh, that's not new. But what is new is this production of the egg. So internal organs, this view would be, a cross section, right? A side view. I don't like this as much as the anterior view that we had the first slide, but just so you know kind of how this all fits in here. Essentially, you have majora and minora here. Then you have the urethra right here. So this is urinary bladder to urethra right there anteriorly. And then just posterior to the urethra would be the vaginal orifice, vagina, cervix or cervical orifice. Kind of depends, I guess, this whole region is the cervix. Just that little tiny dot there is a cervical orifice. Once you're past the cervical orifice, you're in the uterus. Here it's quite a compact, small organ that sits just on top of the bladder, which might answer a question that you may have heard reference to, which is, why do very pregnant ladies pee so frequently? And the obvious answer is that look at the location from the bladder to the uterus, right? If there's a kiddo in there and that uterus is growing and growing and growing, which it is, there's only so much space available. So it's going to press down on that bladder. And since the bladder is responding to pressure changes and stretch receptors, they're going to need to urinate or feel the urge to urinate much more frequently than they would, just because there's only so much real estate in here for how much is going on. Then the ovary and the uterine tube extend up from the uterus. And then behind the uterus is large intestine, sigmoid colon, rectum, anus from the digestive system. So it's kind of a cool, I guess it's kind of a useful view to see how anteriorly to posteriorly, how these things fit in there. So, that's useful, I suppose, in that respect. This diagram is the one I prefer because it's just a better view of uterus, cervix, vagina in kind of an easier way to view it. So expect this one on the test. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. You have a worksheet that's like literally this picture with boxes over it. I don't plan on taking a grade for it, but I do plan on utilizing it on your test. So if you are having a difficult time filling that out, let me know, because I don't want you to go into that test situation being uncomfortable with that diagram. But like Jacob Krogman taught me, you can just move the boxes. So there should be no reason to have any unanswered blanks. So altogether, this is the first diagram we kind of started with. I sort of walked you crash course speed ovulation to pregnancy because it's all laid out so conveniently with this diagram. But as we kind of go through, a fallopian tube, if you want to call it an oviduct, if you want to call it a uterine tube, if you want to call it a fallopian tube, go for it. I learned them as fallopian tube, so I'm going to say that more frequently, but they all mean the same thing. The fallopian tube's job is to get the egg from the ovary to the endometrium of the uterus, the inner lining of the uterus. The oviducts or the fallopian tube are lined with ciliated cells. We kind of made that analogy last time. It's sort of like a crowd passing a very large beach ball, around a stadium for like a concert. It's the same thing. The egg is swept along by the cilia, which have these rhythmic kind of beating, right? Rhythmic. I can't really call it a contraction because it's not technically a muscle. Whatever. They move in a rhythm, okay? And the rhythm moves the egg slowly along the fallopian tube. There is actually a little bit of peristalsis that goes on here, which is kind of cool, right? Because if for whatever reason the egg was having a difficult time moving with the cilia alone, then the peristalsis, which is a wave-like contraction down a tube, would get that egg moved. And so that's really the job of a fallopian tube. I'd hate to throw a percentage out because I'm not really qualified to do that, but let's just, for funsies' sake, say 99% of the time, this is where fertilization is going to take place. So if the sperm is going to meet an egg, and the timing is correct for that to happen, it's probably going to happen in the fallopian tubes. That's the best place for that to happen. I don't want to throw out any wrong numbers, but I think, don't quote me on this, I think if sperm get to a fallopian tube, they can remain viable in the fallopian tube for like, I don't know, 2 to 5 days or something like that. Like, it's not just a great environment for an egg, it's also a great environment for nurturing sperm. And so that's an interesting thing to think that like a sperm could potentially, be in the fallopian tube, like prior to ovulation essentially, and be held in that fallopian tube until the egg meets it. And there could be days in between that. So that's a cool, like, that's kind of a weird, odd thing. Oh, sorry. What's that?
So would that, if you remember the Great Sperm Race, would that be the part where they're all floating on the floaties and stuff?
Yes.
Like
That is the part where they're all sitting on the pool floaties, relaxing, drinking lemonade in their plain white t-shirts as life-size sperm. Thank you, John. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep, you got it, sir. Jacob McIntyre, I have that same hat. Fun side note. Okay, Tori.
So how did the sperm survive, like, with the temperature conditions in the fallopian tube? Because don't they need to be cooler?
Good question. Yes, good question. They have to be cooler for their formation. So the meiosis that takes them from primary spermatocyte to functioning sperm has to be a little cooler than the body cavity. Once they're functioning swimming sperm, they'll do fine, 98 to 100 degrees. Yep.
Okay.
So the inside of the uterus, the inside of the fallopian tube is going to be whatever the body temperature of, soon to be mom is going to be. And humans, we there's a variation, but everybody's pretty much between, 98 and 100, and they'll do fine that way. Yeah, that's a great question. Yep. So let's see. The infundibulum is basically this, you could call it a cone, but basically this little area right here is called the infundibulum. And that is essentially, like, if this is the ovary, the infundibulum is going to kind of fit right around that ovary so that the odds of an egg being ovulated and missing a fallopian tube is incredibly small. The infundibulum fits right around the ovary, and then it's got these little bitty finger-like projections called fimbriae. And fimbriae are going to work a lot like cilia. And so ovary is going to pop an egg out. And when the ovary pops an egg out, there's an infundibulum with fimbriae around, and the fimbriae are like gently sweeping so that when that egg gets popped out of there, the fimbriae are going to pull it in to the oviduct, fallopian tube, uterine tube, and the odds are going to be, the best odds that she can give this egg to be in the right place at the right time. And that's ovulation. Sorry, I should have said that earlier. When an egg matures, the process of that egg actually coming out of the ovary is called ovulation. Most women will ovulate one egg from one ovary per 28-day cycle, which even 20, there's a lot of variations 28-day cycle. So don't, don't take that to the bank necessarily. But generally speaking, they should alternate left, right, left, right. That's not necessarily always the case by any means, but you should ovulate one egg every 28 days from one side to go to one uterine tube. And so essentially that should give sperm a 50-50 shot of like what's behind door number one, what's behind door number two, because when they get into the uterus, there's two channels, right? But we also know from in vitro fertilization that sperm can sense where an egg is and turn the direction of where that egg is. And there's also a bit of evidence that there's, how should we say, it's like uterine contractions that are very gentle but will push sperm cells kind of toward the side that the egg is coming down. I have no idea how that's regulated. Okay, I'm not that smart. I'll never be that smart to know how exactly all that works. But it's pretty, like, come on, that's kind of cool, right? Pretty finely tuned system there. So let's see. We talked infundibulum. I would like you to know that term. We talked fimbriae. I would like you to know that term. What they do is incredibly important. So no ovary, no infundibulum, no fimbriae, no fallopian tubes. Those are, I'll have like a Quizlet or something for you, but those are super important structures. Sorry, I have a big diesel truck with a concrete mixer on the back climbing the hill, so hopefully that's not too noisy.
Mr. Stecker.
Yes.
So for like twins, is there an egg from each side that's fertilized, or how does that work?
Yeah, great question. Monozygotic twins or dizygotic twins are two different situations. I think you guys probably call them identical and fraternal. And so identical twins, mom ovulates one egg from one side, one sperm makes it to the egg. You have a diploid zygote with a set of genes that is unique to that diploid zygote. As the diploid zygote goes through embryo, baby, pick a term, goes through mitosis to make the zygote bigger, split the cell to become a baby human. One cell, for whatever reason, breaks away. Now he's still got a complete set of chromosomes that are completely identical to his brother or sister, has to be the same gender, no duh. And then that cell doubles and doubles and doubles. And so what you get then is two embryos that came from one egg and one sperm that have the exact same DNA to the letter, dividing and dividing and dividing. Sometimes they'll be hooked together still a little bit, like that cell won't completely get free, but he'll develop on his own anyway, and they might be connected at the shoulder or the arm or, whatever. But that's how you get your identical twins. Dizygotic or fraternal twins is a different situation. Mom ovulates for whatever reason, two eggs. Maybe from the same ovary, probably from different ovaries. I don't pretend to know exactly what that situation would be. But for whatever reason, mom kicks out two eggs that month. Dad donates 270 million viable sperm, and two different sperm make it to two different eggs. And you get two different zygote diploid babies who have two different sets of DNA. And so they are not genetically the same, and they have to share the space in the uterus until delivery. And that's how you get identical or fraternal twins. Good question. Any other questions? Peyton.
Do twins each have their own placenta, or do they like share one?
Oh, such a good question. Yes, twins do both have their own placenta. And that's a whole different kind of situation too, because bear in mind the uterus is a dome, right? But both those kids have to come out of the bottom because that's the cervix to the vagina. And so ideally you want, even with one kid, you want that placenta anchoring to the top-ish of the uterus so that the placenta is not blocking the exit. With twins, it's twice as risky because now you got two babies sending out two separate placentas, and they both have to dock at the top-ish of the uterus. And a placenta is not small. bear in mind. So this is one of the reasons. I don't know. I wish I had like a friend who was an OB who could like jump in and tell us all this stuff. We need to get Mrs. Schmagel. She's Dr. Schmagel. She knows her stuff there. But basically, that's one of the reasons that your to term is not 40 weeks when you have twins, right? To term is like 26 weeks or something like that. They trim it down because you have two separate placentas, two separate kids sharing the same space, and it's going to be very, very crowded and tricky because they've got the tubes that take them both to their placentas, and you have to get them out without any tubes tangling. So it's pretty cool. But yeah, that's twins. They both grow their own placentas. Great question. All right, and monozygotic twins would as well, by the way. Identical twins, both their own placenta. Good questions. Any other questions? Go once, go twice. Oh no, I forgot my phone. Darn. How are we doing on time? We doing okay?
19.
19. Oh, we're doing great. Okay, so the inside of the uterine tube, not something that I particularly am going to like put this diagram on a test because you have to know. That's ridiculous. You guys already know what cuboidal tissue looks like. We did that in chapter 4. You know what cilia are. We've talked about them in biology. The digestive system and the respiratory system. Cilia are tiny features that move things along. So that's probably not surprising to you. And you know that cuboidal epithelia looks like stacks of cubes. So carry on to something more interesting. Let's talk the uterus. The uterus is a super cool organ, if nothing else, due to the incredible expandable nature of a uterus. Bear in mind that we're starting off like smaller than a pear, and we're going to end up large enough to house, 10-pound child plus placenta. Like this thing is going to like really grow, like holy moly. Anyways, it's a hollow muscular organ. No duh. We've already talked about the 3 layers. I would like you to be reasonably familiar with them. You should know endometrium, and you should know that it's a muscle, right? If you know that, I'm happy. Technically, it's endometrium on the inside. Myometrium is the muscle. Parametrium is the smooth connective tissue covering. I'd like you to be reasonably familiar with those. Endometrium gets most of our attention because it is closely hormonally regulated to receive an embryo every single month, give or take, which is really cool. So the job of the uterus is to receive an embryo. That's exactly what we're supposed to do, right? The sperm meets the egg in the fallopian tube. It starts to divide kind of en route, and then the kiddo docks on that endometrium, starts to develop a placenta, attaches the placenta to the endometrium, and that is the blood barrier between mom and baby. They really shouldn't mix a lot of like mom's blood to the baby. It's a good barrier. The placenta is made by the child. The placenta is a capillary bed. So the kid's blood vessels and mom's blood vessels are like this, right? Her blood's not getting in the kid's blood really to any extent, but the oxygen can go from her capillary to the kiddo's capillary. The glucose and the proteins can go from mom's capillaries to the kid's capillaries. So it's a cool interface for nutrition, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and obviously kiddos' waste products. They're going through the placenta too. It's a two-way road, but it's really cool because there are few viruses, bacteria, pathogens, whatever, that can cross the placenta. It's such a good barrier that it really does a fantastic job of keeping that kiddo safe. And then obviously sustaining its development, right, as oxygen and glucose and proteins and fats are being diffused across that capillary membrane of the placenta to the kiddo. The kiddo is growing. Not to jump into too much embryology, but humans start off with a yolk sac, a small one, not unlike a chicken, right? And the kiddo absorbs its yolk sac sort of while it's growing the placenta. And the yolk sac doesn't last all that particularly long. You might recall that from our chart on blood formation throughout human life. But then the placenta is pretty much taking over from there, which is cool. As far as the terms for like what parts what, if you know that this whole thing is a uterus and that the inner lining is endometrium, I would consider you a pretty sharp, 17, 18-year-old kid. But technically speaking, this is the body right here, and the bottom here is the cervix. Again, I should not be doing this in red. I should choose black or blue or a color that shows up better, so I apologize for that. John Vankis. Sorry, I got you in the chat box. What's your question?
So, if I'm correct, if I've seen this, I don't know, can't there be a birth where the placenta doesn't pop and the baby comes out inside of it?
Okay, give me that question one more time.
I've seen somewhere, and I don't know if it was just fake or not, but can't there be a birth where the baby, like the placenta doesn't pop, like the sac, and the baby comes out inside the sac?
Okay, great question. Great question. So we're confusing a couple of terms, and I'm glad you asked it. The kiddo is in a membrane. Okay, the kiddo develops in a membrane. What in the world is the name for that? Dang it, I will think of it. Give me a second. Well, I'll just let my subconscious chew on that. When a kiddo's in the uterus, okay, placenta, membrane around it, membrane around the kid, and the kid is suspended in fluid the whole time, okay? Water breaking is when, I'm sure you've seen this in movies. I'm just assuming you have. When contractions start, right? We're getting kind of off topic of the uterus, but not that far off because this is a great question. So when contractions start, right? But they're not like real contractions, like we're pushing this kid out today contraction. They're called Braxton Hicks contractions. And that is essentially like the uterus is warming up for the race, okay? Small contractions, period-like cramps is what it would, kind of be comparable to. I've been told, lacking a uterus of my own, I'm just operating off of what I've learned from Tara. And essentially, those little contractions, as they get a little bit stronger and a little bit stronger, because this is our only positive feedback cycle. That's not true. There's others. Whatever. We'll put enough pressure on that bag, that membrane around the kiddo, that it can pop the bag. When it pops the bag, that clear fluid will run out of the cervix, out of the vagina, and that's water breaking.
Well, I saw a video on Animal Planet where that thing was a C-section or something. Because it was an emergency, and they pulled the kid out, but the membrane didn't pop. It was still in that little sack.
A human being, I'm not sure what was on Animal Planet, but a human being, okay, if contractions start, John, and the bag doesn't break, two of our kids, that happened. It was super cool. That bag didn't break, right? You can continue to contract, and you can push a human kiddo out in a membrane, completely wrapped in a bubble. And you just tear the membrane open, and it's like, hey, kiddo, welcome to the world. Start taking breaths. In the United States, if they're in contractions, the doctor will take, Juliana, don't let your hand go numb. I see your hand. I'll ask you for your question in a second. The contractions aren't breaking the membrane. The doctor will actually reach in with a little teeny tiny hooked instrument and just tear that membrane. The fluid will come out, and that will actually speed contractions and speed the birthing process. So back to your original question, which was, is there something happening with a placenta popping? The bag the child exists in is not the placenta. The placenta is a big capillary bed that the farm and ranch kids know of as afterbirth, okay? Kiddo comes out, membrane or not, the membrane will come out eventually. Kiddo comes out, is still attached by a cord, okay? And it's a boy, it's a girl, hooray. And the doctor's clamp, here, dad, don't mess this up. And the doctor gives the dad scissors, cuts the cord, kid is breathing and crying, and everyone's so excited, okay? But it's still not over for poor mom, because even though she's like, I did it, I crossed the finish line, there is still a placenta to come out. And that thing is like this big, okay? It's a big placenta. And it's also dangerous because it must come out in its entirety. It has to be smooth, and there can be no pieces that are ripped off because, and bear in mind, I'm not a doctor. Don't sue me, okay? But if you have a chunk of the placenta, the uterus continues to contract, right, after birth to push out the placenta. If a piece of the placenta is torn off and mom delivers the vast majority of the placenta, but a chunk of that placenta has stayed docked into that endometrium, it can cause problems with bleeding, hemorrhaging that can last days after birth, and that's very dangerous. And so the process of, basically the doctor coming in and you feel kind of bad, but she kind of is pushing on mom's lower abdomen, and she's pushing on this uterus to make sure that she's essentially breaking that seal, between the endometrium and the placenta. So as the placenta works its way out slowly and is birthed after the kiddo is, they'll take it, they'll examine the surface, make sure it's smooth, and that there's nothing left in there. And then like you're home free, essentially. I mean, there's always exceptions, but yeah. So the membrane is not the placenta. They're two different things. Yes, you can be born in a bubble. And sorry, that was probably more than you were asking for, but it's all connected. So Juliana, I'm sure your hand is numb. I am so sorry. What can I help you with?
I actually have the answer to your question about what the membrane that was covering the baby was.
Oh,
I think it's called amniotic fluid.
Yes, an amniotic sac. Yes, thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you. The amniotic sac holds the amniotic fluid, and the amniotic fluid has this kiddo being neutrally buoyant, so they're not like upside down with the blood rushing to their head. Yes, they float. It's super cool. You think about it when they're born. Yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry, I also had a question about the placenta. So, why do animals eat the placenta?
Nutrients.
Yeah, and then we just throw it away. I mean, not suggesting we eat placentas because, like,
Is
it really would it be really hazardous? Stop laughing at me.
No, I'm laughing at John's comment. You're good, Julian. I'm not laughing at you. Some people do. You're good. Go ahead.
I just thought some people.
You're okay. It's a great question. So some animals do eat their own placentas. There's competing ideas for this. Like John said, there are some nutrients in there, iron in the blood, but it's basically a capillary bed, right? So it's blood vessels. My personal hypothesis, which could totally be wrong, is that I think they do it as a predator preventative. That's what I think they do, because I mean, a coyote could smell a big blood bag from a mile away, and that lets him know that that's where the baby deer is, which is like a to-go snack. That's awesome. So my hypothesis for cows and other animals eating their own placentas is to keep predators away. That's what I think. Could they get some iron and stuff out of the blood? Yeah, maybe, potentially, sure. But that's my guess at any rate. So yeah, good question. All right.
I only learned that because I was watching a Bureau Grylls video where he takes celebrities out, and he found like a fresh placenta on the ground, and he was with Shaquille O'Neal, and so he made Shaquille O'Neal eat that for dinner later.
That
and he just goes, it's like the typical Bear Grylls is rich in nutrients and stuff, and just picks the whole thing up.
Yeah. Well, I'd say a hard pass for me. Thanks. Gonna pass on that offer.
He said that people eat that, like people will pay to eat that in restaurants and stuff.
People do not smart things. Yeah. Woo. Anyways, you guys have good questions. You cracked me up. All right. So, let's see. Oh yeah, here's the 3 layers of the uterus. We've kind of already talked about these, and so you should be aware of them. Endometrium's on the inside, which gets most of our attention because, like I mentioned, it's hormonally regulated based on its thickness. Myometrium being the muscle layer, really its job is going to be to do those contractions that will actually push the kiddo out into the world. And then the perimetrium is really just a place for tendons and ligaments to dock, a smooth connective tissue layer on the outside. So that's what that looks like. Probably layers you're already familiar with, but if you want to write them down, I can certainly wait a second. Can anybody tell me how I'm doing on time? Because I do not have my...
32.
Did you say 33?
32.
Oh, no. We went over by 2 minutes? I'm so sorry, guys. Okay. Shut it down. All right. So we will stop the recording, and we'll call it a day. You guys, thanks for your questions. Good questions. Fun questions for sure. I think it's pretty interesting stuff to say the least. So let's see. Tomorrow's Friday. We're going to Zoom meeting again. We'll go through female physiology. Finish up the chapter probably Monday, Tuesday, and review Wednesday, test Thursday, embryology at a glance on Friday, and that's a school year, guys. So it's going fast.